Hey, Matt Tamua, who do you think's got more tries in Super Rugby? Alan Alatoa or Matt Tamua?
You're a bastard. Geez. He's played more games, though, so we're talking per games played?
We're not. We're just talking who's scored more tries. Who do you think it is?
Who's got more points? Yeah, I would have more points than him, yeah.
I'm sure you do have more points. And also when you're a goal kicker. How many tries do you think you got in Super Rugby?
I honestly have no. I know I had 1 year where I got a few, and then I was pretty lean after that. Yeah, pretty lean.
I looked it up this afternoon. I thought, you know what? Alan Alatoa's just crossed for his 7th try of the year. And unlike Carlo Gisano or Matt Fesler or Billy Pollard, they're not all rolling more tries, believe it or not. 7, the latest against the Reds, and he's now, that brings his total to 11. You, on the other hand, 12 for the Brumbies, 2 for the Rebels, 14 tries in Super Rugby.
Killing it. I've got years up my sleeve. You got me nervous there. I thought, why would you bring that up? Yeah, look, Alan's been great this year too. But let's be honest, how many meters? They've been important, but they haven't been many. At least Carlo Tizzano's had to, Alan's just kind of belly flopped over.
That's very funny.
Yeah, he's been good though this year. I saw him a couple of weeks ago and spoke to him particularly about his Achilles. There's often that second year coming back, but he's been super solid. And I think him, Slips, that front row has been crucial. Like if you look at last year, we had a lot of concerns over their set piece, but it's really turned a corner this year.
I reckon he has been Australia's best player in Super Rugby. That's how good I think he's been. Unfortunately, a calf injury, which has him touch and go for the final series. So we'll talk about that in a little bit longer and a little bit later in this episode. But I'll tell you who is officially the Super Rugby Player of the Year, and that's Ardie Savea. If you can believe that, they've already announced it. I'm not quite sure why they've done that. That's definitely one that I said months ago shouldn't occur until at least the finals. But an unbelievable performance, not just from Ardie on the weekend against the Blues, but Moana Pacifica taking and tackling their big brothers, the Blues, and winning there is an unbelievable result for Super Rugby. The finals ramifications are really heating up. There's heaps of contracting news out there at the moment. I'll give a little bit more detail around that in a moment. And we're also going to be joined by a former Wallabies captain, a person who played against the Lions, and also the current Brumbies assistant. And that man is Ben Mowen. He's going to be coming up a little bit later. Heaps more on the other side of this. You're listening to the Roar Rugby podcast. I'm Christy Doran with Matt Tamua. Matt, what do you think, mate? The Brumbies atop the Super Rugby standings with 2 weeks to go. They're having the bye this week, so let's be honest, they're probably going to get taken over by the end of this coming week. But tell me, are they a chance to snap their Super Rugby drought 21 years after their last fully fledged title in 2004?
Definitely a chance. Yeah, definitely a chance. I think top 2 would be really ideal. But that being said, some of the Brumbies' best games this year have actually been away from home. So there's a few things kind of coming together. One thing as well, traditionally the Brumbies, even when I was there, was often limped into the finals. A strong start to the year. And then just really limped into the finals. And barring this bye week into the Crusaders, have a very, very strong chance of actually having some momentum into the finals, which is huge. Particularly, particularly only a short final series. Momentum's massive.
Oh, totally. I love the fact that they've got a bye this week because on the other side of it, they'll have Noah Loloseo return from his back injury. They'll have Luke Reimer come back from a concussion. But the big one is Alan Alatoa. He came off early in the second half against the Reds, a 24-14 win. A really good second half performance where a bit of adversity. They lost Declan Meredith to a HIA check and it was 7-all, and it was that for much of the first half. And the Brumbies just, their physicality, I loved the game first up, but their physicality is what won them. I think Rob Ballatini had his best game of the year, totally rolled up his sleeves. Tom Hooper's just going from strength to strength at the moment. It's not just a character on the field, but hopefully he one day comes back to Aussie rugby after a stint with Exeter. Alan Alatol was brilliant for the first half. I loved what Andy Muirhead did. Ryan Lonergan, kicking off his left foot as well throughout the game. There was so much to be pleased about with that result. And, yeah, the Reds dropped it, and you're hoping that Aussie sides, are going to be right there for the pointy end. Well, we've got one there right now with the Brumbies.
Yeah, and I tell you what, the teams have really shown how to beat the Reds. The Brumbies at that defensive breakdown, they were not necessarily always just going on the ball, but they were just targeting that breakdown, whether they were getting counters and actually getting the ball back, or they're just slowing it up. And it's the old kind of, adage of teams that are good with the ball, you stop them, at the breakdown. And one way you can do that is on the ball or just actual pressure at the breakdown. And they did it so well. And the Reds off slower ball just aren't as much of a threat. And we've seen them in wet conditions, which usually slower ball as well has been their Achilles heel this year. So Brumbies, fair play. I think if you look at Stephen Larkham and how he's beaten the Reds twice this year, but also responded well against the Waratahs, there's been some coaching masterclass going on there.
Yeah, that's a really good shout, actually. And I thought they did that brilliantly. They exposed the Reds in the second half, particularly getting some width in the game. That's a word that Timmy Warren loves to use. But I think they missed a beat, the Reds, in the first half. Like Tate McDermott, a great little gap either side of the ruck, and he ends up linking up with Tim Ryan, who finished superbly for the Reds to start well. But I think they've 2 or 3 times this year they've had to bank the points, and I know that the rolling ball can be a bit of a weapon for them. But 26th minute, they decide to kick for the corner. Rob Ballatini's second phase off the back of a pretty quick maul that was stopped, and Nick Berry told him to use it. Brumbies get on the ball, Ballatini gets on the ball, turnover, and I just thought it's a low-scoring game. You're away from home. You're missing Sarah Uru, Tom Liner, Lukan Salakaia-Loto, 2 or 3 props already. Take the points. Put scoreboard pressure on and make this Brumbies side, who's got a pretty inexperienced 10, make them nervous.
Yeah, and you just, the sign of a good coaching team often is how the team progresses through the year, and how they react to, or respond to things that are happening, trends in the game. And look, the Reds started really, really well and really, I love the idea of it, but they've got to bring some pragmatism, I think, to their game now. Because it is finals footy. They've got, because the Brumbies probably spent all week on a maul, and on a maul defense. And if you don't have any variety to your game, they're professional. They're good now. They'll learn to kind of match that. Whereas you look at other teams now, they're playing off the top, they're swinging, they're going for points, they're doing tap moves. It's hard to kind of put your finger on things. And I think the Reds, albeit love the advent, love the type of rugby that they're endeavouring to play, there's got to be some pragmatism, because otherwise they'll just get beaten by smarter teams.
I think as well, it actually puts more pressure on their inside backs. Like Hunter Paisami is always trying things, and I love Hunter for his endeavour and what he gives and offers a Super Rugby side particularly. I think at Test footy at times maybe not quite big enough and physically can just get caught between trying to overplay his hand. And I don't know if he was still pretty good on the weekend, but I loved what Ollie Sapsford did. He only played 30 minutes in the game, but he was hard and straight and head down, and ball security was a really big thing for him. But I think if you're not getting what you need out of the maul, sides are really, particularly Paisami, there was a short kick that Ryan Lonergan scooped up really early on in the game, and it just releases the pressure valve, and that's why I think 3 points is so important. And we've seen it cost them against the Chiefs across the ditch. We saw it cost them against the Brumbies back in Brisbane, a month and a half ago, and now once again. So it's a really crucial element of the game. It's something about which wins and decides games of Super Rugby finals, but also Test footy. A person that knows a little bit about decision-making is Ben Mowen. He joins us on the other side of this. Hello, Benny.
Hey, guys. How you going?
Ben Mowen knows something about decision-making. I've heard it all.
I've made the best decision of my life to give you Swerve as a friend.
You made the best decision of your life again now while you're Wallaby captain, because you weren't going to be it much longer. Hey, Benny, how you going?
Good, lad. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Hey, boys, you guys don't really need any introductions anyway. It was good hearing a little bit of the banter there between the two of you. Ben and Matt, Brumbies teammates, Wallabies teammates. Boys, what's it like? You know, you're both living in Canberra. Ben, you're back second season with the Brumbies from a coaching perspective. What's it like being back immersed in Super Rugby? Because you were away for quite a while.
Yeah, look, it's great to be back around the team. Obviously, it's a familiar feel anytime you enter a Brumbies building, having been part of those teams good decade or so ago. But look, it's such a great competition. It's particularly this year, I think, you know, compared to previous years, it's just one of those comps where anyone can beat anyone, and each stage prep's important, and we're very fortunate we've got a group that understand that, which has always been pretty typical of the Brumbies and the way they prepare. But you know, it's a very, very privileged experience to be back there as a coach.
Benny, thanks for joining today. Obviously, John Allegia wasn't available, so you jumped on short notice. But just what does separate all?
That's fine.
What does this Brumbies team? You know, obviously being so close in the last quite a few years. What do you like about this team the most? Because one thing I've enjoyed a lot is just seeing the team grow throughout the year. Whereas I was saying to Christy earlier, like Brumbies traditionally, especially when we were there, often limped into the finals. Whereas I think you guys have really started to time your run quite well, and probably shown a maturity of coaching that the team actually improves throughout the year.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of parts to that. There's definitely we're playing better footy than we were last year. So yes, finished semi-finalists last year. Didn't really give a great account of ourselves in that semi-final, and just played a far better side on the day. So, but there was definitely a lot of parts to our game that needed to improve last year. Whereas I feel like we have achieved that in so many areas. Yeah, we're much more potent on first phase launch. Our scrum is very strong. We're mauling better. Our line-out's more efficient. And certainly our ruck work has been outstanding on both sides of the ball. So, you know, we're approaching this end of the year where we've been sort of almost tradesman-like in our build-up, where we just kept focusing singularly on areas of our game rather than this match is more important than that one, or this time of year is important. We've just been chipping away at it, and you can see the confidence in the group growing. I think they've got a great understanding now of what their strengths are as a group and how to play to them. And so, you know, it's exciting that they've put themselves in a position now where potentially can finish top two with a couple of rounds to go. And then, like, as you guys know, once you get to finals, it's all bets are off, and you just got to be going.
It's extraordinary to think you were very much, you know, both of you really, like against the Chiefs back in 2013, the last time that the Brumbies made the big dance, and then so many semi-finals appearances since then. Ben, your second year with the franchise from a coaching perspective, how have you found it coming back? A bit of time in Brisbane club rugby, but is it a leap? Have you found it a leap? Was there a few teething issues in year one when people were adapting to new styles on the back of Laurie Fisher departing the Brumbies? What have you kind of learned as a second year Super Rugby assistant coach, rather?
I think club rugby set myself up really well to be highly adaptable. Obviously, when you're doing a head coaching role at club rugby, you're the recruiter, the team manager, the game day manager. You're the liaison officer for guys that come from town and need a hand. You're helping them get into units. You're filling out rental applications. You're really doing everything. And then you're trying to deliver a rugby program on the back of it. And so moving into a Super Rugby program, it allows you to narrow your focus and just focus on your contribution. Obviously, it was always going to be a big challenge last year for the playing group, myself arriving, where you've had such continuity with Laurie Fisher for so long on his defensive systems and principles. And certainly a large portion of what I delivered to the group was better than those principles, because like pup, and probably half of Australia, we learnt so many great traits through Laurie. So you're not trying to reinvent those things, but you are adapting and putting your own spin on them. And so certainly, whilst there was some big rocks there that remained the same, there was a lot of things that changed for the playing group. So, doing a big install of the defensive system was a big ask in year one. And then certainly at the same time delivering a makeover of the line-out system, mauling system. And once again, similar foundations to the great coaches that had prefaced stuff there before. There was no revolutionary things. It was just different language, different approach. So I think from a playing group's perspective, they did really well to adapt to those two things in the first season. My big takeaway and has been from gathering feedback from so many great coaches who've influenced my career is building continuity through being consistent in your delivery. So year two wasn't about doing anything largely different. It was just about simplifying messages, making sure that whilst the big rocks had been installed, it was just getting the finer details going. And the benefit of being in year two and the boys being familiar with the way I was working with them is they take far more ownership. They drive the messages, which is where I was hoping we would get to. And that's certainly been the case now. And I think what you're seeing in terms of the on-field performance increasing is their ownership, their ideas, and their understanding of what was installed last year coming to fruition now. So, from a coaching perspective, you hope that you're always empowering the guys with the right knowledge and detail, but then they're going to take that last little bit and finish it off. And so I think that's what we're seeing with them now.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing there's been a couple of games that you've been probably a little bit slow out the blocks, but then really wrestle it back and through defense and breakdown. And one thing I probably noticed last year was that traditional Brumbies strengths in terms of, breakdown, even more, those things, or scrum in particular last year, weren't massive strengths anymore. And we felt like there's a big focus on the attacking, side of the game and really trying to grow that. But feels like quite a nice marriage this year again as well. Like it feels like we're benefiting from expanding that first phase play or counter-attack play last year, but then really getting those systems and defensively, line out, scrum, kind of add in an element to the game where there's a bit more now. That's what it feels like anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a byproduct of the investment we had in the off season just around our unit components and spending more time there in preparation to make sure that we could deliver really stable bases to attack off. I think the Brumbies games always had really good great unstructured attack and structured attack, and obviously the consistency there of Rod Saib, who's been driving that program for 5-6 years. There was a lot of knowns there, and so then it was just adapting back and forth to make sure that the playing group got used to John and I around what we were trying to achieve there. And we had a really big off-season around breakdown, mauling, scrummaging. We asked a lot of the players. It was really tough, and they kept showing up. The attitude was outstanding. And what we saw was the group that worked pre-Christmas really set a bar super high for the returning Wallabies, and hence why when you look at our first round game, we picked the best players we thought could win that round, and it was the guys who'd done all the preseason because they were so conditioned, so aware of what our systems were, that they'd earned that right to represent the team. So when you've got potentially what is the non-travelling Wallaby part of your squad pushing the standards, I think you're going to have a pretty strong year.
Well, we've definitely seen that, and it certainly helps when Alan Alatoa is back to his best form. You would be pleased, being a former Wallabies forward, of how important a tight head he is, and he's just back to his career best form. And I was telling Matt beforehand that he's catching up to him in terms of Super Rugby tries as well. So that's something that Matt was sweating about earlier. I imagine the whole kind of side and squad is sweating a little bit on him and his recovery from his calf injury as well. So he's likely out for couple of weeks was the statement earlier today, but we know with calves they can be niggly as well, so you probably won't necessarily rush him back. Changing subjects away from the props a little bit, Tom Hooper. Tell us a little bit about him and what you've made of him, because his season, it's been his best Super Rugby season by a country mile. Obviously been captain for the Wallabies back in 2023 under Eddie Jones and was in and out last year under Joe Schmidt. Tell us about him and where you see the trajectory of the guy's game, because he's having a heck of a year and he's obviously off to Exeter shortly.
Yeah, look, he's been outstanding, and I think he really set his year up. Like most guys, when you can tell what sort of temperature they're going to set for themselves in the preseason by the way they run their first preseason testing. And look, for a 123, 124 kilo guy, he runs a 445 Bronco. He's unbelievably fit, and he rocked up and he just set a real marker there around what his intentions were this year. And look, I think it's easy for guys, definitely easy, someone that age, to have a commitment further down the track and be distracted or, have one eye on that. And he said right from the go, he announced to the team that he was leaving for a couple of seasons, potentially we'll be back in the future. But he wanted to make sure he left his mark and really contributed. And anyone who knows Tommy Hooper, he is an amazing person, just this unbelievable energy daily. I don't know how his mum survived him growing up. She must have run him from Bathurst to Sydney and back each day just to get the energy out of him. But when he enters a room, you know about it. He's got great energy. He's always been an outstanding trainer. And what he's layered this year with that energy and training is real detail. And so, his breakdown work's outstanding. His carry's outstanding. His line-out work is improved out of sight, and he's a genuine asset there now. So you've got this really rounded player who has the capacity to run all day. So he's a gift to have in your team.
Yeah, well, you saw that on the weekend. There was probably one passage of play where he did 3 or 4 carries in quick succession, and that was in the second half, and a testament to that fitness that you're talking about. You surprised many people when you went overseas, and you did that when you'd just broken in really and established yourself as a Wallaby, as a captain. Probably a two-parter. In hindsight, are you glad you did it? Because obviously you probably denied yourself many, many caps and maybe a World Cup campaign as well in 2015. But the second one being, for some players who decide to go, and they've decided to go ahead of the Lions series, would you love them to be just as much in the forefront of Joe Schmidt's mind as others, like Alangi Gleeson, like a Tom Hooper, like in 50-50 scenarios? Would you still have the person who's had the better year selected, or do you agree with what RA's kind of done and they're saying, in the sense that when 50-50s will go those that have committed themselves to Australian rugby going forward?
Yeah, look, I definitely lean on the side we've got to get the strongest team on the park, and this is going to be a tough series, but we have the potential to really perform well. So getting the best players in the park is going to be the best way obvious way to ensure that happens. I'd be rewarding guys that have contributed to Australian rugby this year. I'd see it more in that circumstance where they've played Super Rugby this year. The series lands right at the back end of Super Rugby. I'd be using that momentum. And look, I think the other part of this too is that a lot of the guys we're talking about are of the age profile where they will potentially be back. And so what a great carrot to give them to experience what a Lion series is, to then say, we'd love to have you back around the home World Cup. You can only imagine what that's going to be like. It'll be a Lion series again. So I would definitely be involving them. I think a lot of those guys too fall in that same category as Tom, where they've performed outstanding. So they're obviously guys that can deal with a lot of pressure, which is going to be around the Lions. The guys can deal with expectation, and they've been big contributors for the Super Rugby side. So, we need those guys in the Wallabies.
I can't believe I'm agreeing with you, Benny. I'm the same. I don't know why you'd go into a fight with one arm behind your back and make it harder for us. And I understand why they might say, oh, we don't want to encourage other people to go. But the best marketing tool we have is winning a Lion series. It doesn't matter who we use. Like, that's going to want people to stay. That's going to get momentum. That's going to get people watching, and I think it'd be short-sighted to penalise guys who are going overseas next year. Like, it's the best thing we can do for the game is to win that series, and then people will want to stay. So, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Ben, what about you and your decision to leave when you did? Like, were you happy with that? Like, content with it? It's obviously a decade down the track, so I'm sure you've thought about it at times. But tell us a little bit about that and the decision making that's involved when you do go.
Yeah, look, I think it was my decision in the end. As tough it was, became very simple. I was a Brisbane boy growing up. I'd played at the Reds, and when I joined the Reds, I thought, this is me. I'm going to be here for 10 years. I'll play 100 games. I really believed in that dream. And I had so many injuries back to back. I actually had a conversation where I was coming off contract, and Phil Mooney sat me down and he said, mate, there just isn't a contract for you. And so I'd been through that scenario, and then I moved to Sydney and played club rugby and picked up a gig with the Waratahs, and then played there for 4 years and was starting to play some really good footy, and then got sat down by a coach again and said, yeah, look, unfortunately there's no spot for you next year and you have to find another job. And so there was multiple times in my career where I had dealt with that challenge and then had to have some pretty tough conversations off the back of it. So I got my dog coming to say g'day.
Really?
And so I know how quickly that stuff can turn. And I was 29 at that stage where I was making this decision. And it was the start of that Super Rugby season in 2013 where I thought, look, the lines are on. I'm going to give this like a real good shake. But I had played for 8 years at that stage in Australia. And I'd been in the squad but not played for Australia. And my mind was starting to think about, well, I know how quickly this stuff can change. And a big box we wanted to tick as a family was to live overseas. And the opportunity just came up at that time. And I thought, this is sliding doors. I've been on the other side of the sliding doors too many times, and you don't go through them. And, when you've got mortgages and stuff like that, it's some pretty tough times. So I made the decision that I thought this is the best thing that's in front of me right now, and not easy, but then in hindsight it's very easy. And look, I've never thought that was a decision I'd take back or change. I think you are the sum of your experiences, and my experiences led me to that decision because I'd been on the other side of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It brings a human element to it as well about how difficult the decision can be with players, and you don't know whether or not you're going to play another test. That's the reality of it, particularly when there's new coaches and so forth. Speaking of new coaches, Jeff Parling it was announced last week that he's going to take over at Leicester Tigers, and that's kind of come from nowhere because there was a couple of other coaches that were very much at the top of the tree, like Leo McDonald, who was shortlisted, and then Jeff Parling ends up, getting in there after a couple of people knocked it back. It means that there's going to be a vacancy from the Wallabies coaching perspective in the lead up to the World Cup. And I know Les Kiss is still to come on board in the mid of 2026. But from a philosophical kind of point of view, is that something that would interest you? It's a very similar skill set. I know that you've done the defence with the Brumbies, but you can also do the line out, and clearly Jeff Parling's a line out specialist coach there. So is it something that raises your eyebrows and you get excited about potentially applying?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think all of us working or playing in Australia have the dream of being in that room. That's where you want to be, and certainly I would want to be in that dressing room at some stage. Should that opportunity pop up at this time, then I'm considered a chance. Yeah, I definitely would. I think that's that it's such a privilege to be a coach period, and let alone if you get the opportunity to then coach Super Rugby or coach in that environment, and then you look at the wealth of knowledge that's in that room, you get better through your experiences, your exposures. So, to have access to that type of group, we've been really fortunate. All those coaches have been really giving of their time, and for example, Chrono comes down and spends a week with the Brumbies, as he does with all the super sides, and the absolute pearls of wisdom you get through that week, through small conversations, little focus points, simplifying, it just makes you a better coach through a few conversations over a coffee. And so, when you're talking about an opportunity to coach in that group and have more exposure, it's just an easy decision.
Before we let you go, Matt didn't play against the Lions from a Wallabies perspective, so I can't go to him. You did, and you featured pretty prominently.
We beat them though, without Benny. So we actually had some good leadership that night, so it was good.
I remember Pete Kimlin's famous speech.
Oh, mate, we still talk about Pete Kimlin's speech. That was hilarious. We got ready way too early, Christy, and Pete went off, he went psycho, and then the manager goes, 90 seconds. So he had to keep on going, and it was hilarious. But it was awesome. So like I said, good leadership. Funny what that does, eh?
Good from you, Matt. Well, Ben, the series itself, clearly 2-1, the Lions won, and everyone dreamt of what might have been come Sydney after the win in Melbourne. What was it like from a playing perspective to be thrust in it? Was it what you anticipated? And just how big is it? And the players who are around selection at the moment, I know that James O'Connell was speaking about it, how much he's grown over the last 12 years. But when you think about it right now, what kind of pearls of wisdom, what's your greatest memory from that amazing series in 2013?
Yeah, look, it was obviously a really unique series and something so special to be a part of. I think the biggest thing I'd say to the lads is you've got to prepare this is something you're probably never ever going to experience or experienced previously. A home World Cup would have to be the only thing that would come close, I could imagine, but it's a real us and them. So there's so many travelling supporters. Every town, there's red jerseys everywhere. I remember before the first test, I went to go for a walk for a coffee, and the moment the sliding doors opened to Brisbane, you could hear singing. And it was 9 a.m. and there were people everywhere. And I just did a U-turn. I was like, I'm not walking out into that. But the atmosphere is absolutely off the charts. And it's just traveling party for essentially what is 8-9 weeks. So it is a very unique, amazing thing to be a part of. And so, for the players, I think, they've put a lot into this season because they know that big carrot's coming. So that's going to be even more special for those guys that get named with that responsibility to represent Australia throughout that series. But, I think back about those tests. Test 1 was my test debut in Brisbane. And so all my family and friends were there, which was quite amazing. Obviously, we had that moment where we'd fought back into the test, played really well. And then Kirtley was going for a kick at full time and slipped just to miss it. And the kick just sails right. And then, you have to come through that heartache and coming so close to then rebuild yourself in a week. And then we got the job done in Melbourne. And so you're entering that side of 1-1. And I don't think I've ever been more nervous in my life than driving on that bus trip out to Homebush. And there's just so much traffic, and you can see people walking through the traffic in red jerseys, waving flags, shaking at the bus. And I think there was 85, 90,000, whatever it was out at Homebush, whatever the capacity is there. And the noise, you just couldn't hear a thing. You couldn't hear a line-out call. You couldn't hear the bloke next to you. So, all the work we'd done as a group of that month leading into that series, you had to rely on that because you could no longer verbally communicate with the bloke standing right next to you. You had to do it all a feel, and obviously it was pretty tight for 40 minutes there, and then we got blown away in that second half by a very good line side. So, look, it's my greatest memory is that I was fortunate enough throughout my career to lead back to Brisbane and have my test debut in front of family and friends. I would have loved for our group of men to have got that job done. It was really gutting in the end to lose that series, and but what an amazing series that was. There was so many obviously amazing superstars that finished up for the British Irish Lions, like Brian O'Driscoll's last game, Paul O'Connell's last game. So to be in that series against the quality of that, and then as all great rugby traditions are, as gutted as you are, we walked into the sheds at full time and sat there and had beers with those boys and shared how challenging that 2 months was, because it's equally challenging for those guys as it was for us. So, I share that unique experience of walking through that sheds, sitting down with a few of those guys having a beer, and actually Daniel Craig was in there, Bond himself, sitting down having a beer with the Lions lads. So I was sitting next to Daniel Craig having a stubby with Sean O'Brien. So there's so many good, cool, unique experiences that came from it as well. But, it was very disappointing to lose the series.
Hey, some heck of a memories there. Just before you let you go, Daniel Craig, if he was to play rugby in a position, what position do you reckon Bond would have lined up in?
Well, mate, the camera's an amazing thing because he's tiny, so he's a halfback. He had a huge aura, but he's not a tall man.
I think he would have replaced George Smith there at 7, and George wouldn't have been allowed back on, unfortunately, that game.
Yeah, true. Hey, Ben, awesome to chat. Really good to get to know a bit more about your Lions experience, particularly. It's fascinating insight, and I completely echo your sentiments around and Matty's about picking the best side. You've got to do it. You've got to win the series. So we will see in the tour just kicking off in about 5 weeks' time with the Force arriving on Aussie shores. I'm sure you're looking forward to coaching against the Lions in early July as well. So we wish you best of luck for the final series as well. And I really appreciate you coming on the Roar Rugby podcast.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good luck, Benny, for the finals.
Cheers, guys.
I really enjoyed that, Matt. Would you say he's a wise man?
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it, mate. It was painful. I had to listen to it. No, he is. Like I said, I would never say it to his face, but he's a wise man, Benny. And he is made for coaching. I was almost surprised it took him so long in a weird way, even though it didn't. Made for coaching. Like he gets it, gets enough of it, but also can make the hard calls when he needs to. So yeah, very wise man.
Okay, we're not going to talk about that for too long. What do you mean he's made for coaching? Because I'm interested in that, because he's a guy that's had a pretty rapid rise through, and I liked what he said about he spent a year or two in Brisbane Club Rugby, and you look at the history of coaches and those that have started from rock bottom, essentially, Scott Robertson at Canterbury, or, Michael Checker, Eddie Jones, even Stephen Hoyles at Randwick winning and then going abroad. It seems like it grounds people well. What do you think are some of the strengths of Ben in terms of, because he might be the next Wallabies line-out coach with Jeff moving on?
His attention to detail is remarkable. He was always in charge of the line-outs. Jake used to just make him in charge of that stuff, and he'd spend hours and hours and hours on tape, like old school. But the thing about Benny is he's willing to say the unpopular thing, and he's willing to be maybe disliked for something if it suits the vision or if it suits, and for past players, that's usually the issue. Like usually past players who go into coaching, they're kind of pals with the other players, and they don't really want to have those hard conversations. And Benny was doing that when he was playing. Benny would happily confront you as a player and tell you, like, mate, I reckon, and he used to challenge me a lot. And as a young guy, he used to tell me a lot, you're not young. Stop using this as an excuse. Like he would have like these awkward conversations with you, which weren't friendly, but they were for the betterment of the team, and a little bit of old school kind of, when he needed to, a strong hand kind of thing was good. And yeah, I just always thought he'd be for it because he loves the game as well. He's obsessed by it, and he kind of sees the bigger picture quite well.
Good insights there, and certainly stuff that I knew a little bit about, but I loved what he spoke about with the Lions and what it means and represents, and even the fact that, the U-turn of when you're confronted by all these Brits, and it just reminded me of, the World Cup and World Cups that you might have been at and experienced yourself, but like just recently in France when Australia played Wales, and it was obviously a terrible day for Australian rugby fans, but you go to the main city centre and there are thousands of Welsh fans who are singing right throughout the day, and I just can't wait for Australia to get a positive, great reminder of that, because for smaller cities like Canberra, that'll be amazing. But even the bigger cities, like, I just hope that people embrace it, because I was there at the Waratahs on Friday night, and obviously it was a dreadful game from a Dan McKellar and Waratahs perspective, but the first couple of minutes were just so quiet. And I was thinking, God, I wish, like, sometimes I reported overseas, because you have tens of thousands of people singing, chanting, who are living and breathing rugby. It just doesn't happen here in Australia. And, like, it frustrates the heck out of me. It's in most sports, maybe not AFL, but even the Swans, like, if you go there of an afternoon and they're not having a great day, it's going to be deathly quiet too. And it's a frustrating element of the Australian sporting landscape that we're so quiet when we, and perhaps respectful, or when we go to these events. Like, do you feel that as a player as well? And did you feel that as a player?
Oh, yeah. And like, I don't want to slag our fans by any stretch of the imagination, because you see the numbers that we have in Australia compared to, other countries in the history. Like, we do pretty well, but it was always quite.
It's not just a rugby thing, this though.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. It was always what I always found weird or interesting was when you were away from home, the Aussie fans were louder. Like, it was almost like we needed to be the underdogs to kind of then, so when we're in World Cups and stuff, we had some of the best fans by far. Like, I still remember Twickenham when we knocked out the English. Like, the Aussie fans were just unbelievable. Even in Japan, like, we had some of the most traveling fans, noisy, loud, everything. And yeah, I don't know. It's almost like we get our sense of pride when we're a bit underdog or away from home. I don't know. But yeah, of course, I agree with you, and it definitely isn't unique to rugby. Although rugby does exaggerate it a little bit when, all the scarves and the RMs and stuff are maybe a little bit polite. But we like I say, away from home, we're unreal.
Okay, well, let's stick with the TAR subject for a little bit. Now that I went there on Friday night, you weren't especially thrilled with what you saw. I think you switched off after about 20 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. It was a horrible opening. 3 tries in the first 15 minutes, a try second phase from a line-out passage third minute, where Johnny McNichol, if I'm not mistaken and my memory holds up, scores. Braden Ennell shortly after 10th minute or 8th minute, I think it was, another set-piece play from the Waratahs that goes awry. Interception from Tristan Ryle. It looked just way too lateral, didn't it? And then a rolling maul try that started 15 metres out, and they managed to patiently get them there. It was a shocking start, and it kind of summed up where the Waratahs are at the moment a little bit. Like, and I know it's late in the first year of Dan McKellar, but that wasn't a great game when you're watching it.
No, I'll be honest. I messaged you, said I'm going to Netflix. I watched some documentaries on the Vietnam War, actually, but that was less gruesome. God, I'm getting good at this. The intercept was the bit that, like, once you saw that, like, going that lateral, that part of the field against a team that out in Indies, like, you just knew they were off. And you knew that it could get grim. And fair play, they wrestled it back to, and somehow still in the fight for a final spot, which is, thanks to Moana helping out as well. A night they'd want to forget, I think. And judging from all the reports after the game, they very much felt that as well, more than us.
There's Dan McKellar and Jake Gordon were scathing post game, and Dan went there. He certainly wasn't afraid of saying that he was disappointed, said that, if the players aren't on board, I'm happy to look to players who will be on board. And he said that at half time. And it continued and went further. And then I even actually asked Jake, I said, Jake, you've been here for the last decade. You've been here with some pretty bad defeats. Where does this kind of rank? And he said, this is the worst, because we went in there thinking we're a chance and they were completely dusted in the opening 20 minutes and the game was lost. Like they somehow clawed it back to 10 points behind when they scored back-to-back early in the second half rather. But Pete Summer is coming. I wrote that news last week. I forget whether or not we'd been potted by that point in time. Matt Phillip is coming. Angus Blythe is coming. I think they're losing a big name prop, and there could be a second joining them on the way out. They were toing and froing about what they wanted to do it in the 10 jersey as well. But beyond the selection sort of stuff, it just seems like Waratah's teams haven't handled the expectation, but they haven't probably been the disciplined players that they need to be because they've been perennial underachievers. I'm sure you're quite happy to hear those words being a former Rebel and a Brumbies player, and a Queenslander, of course. But they've got some sorting out to do over the next couple of weeks and months ahead because it was never going to happen really quickly. But there's a lot of talent there, and you're thinking they should have done better than what they did this year.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Jake's frustrations, despite being a part of a team that didn't win a game all year, was probably because there is a little bit of belief there, and rightfully so, that they won some games at the death early in the year, and there's that potential. And like the Tars do have to deal with more pressure than any other teams in Australia in terms of expectation to win. The game does well when Sydney's getting behind their team, all that kind of stuff. But look, we've just spoken about the Brumbies being in a better place the second year in, coaches, stuff like that. As emotional and frustrating as it might be now, they're going to be a better team. I think Dan came in so late that sure he can instill his coaching philosophies and stuff, but he doesn't have his squad yet. Like he didn't
get the squad until late January, right? Or middle of January, after a Wallabies camp in the first, at the end of the first week.
Yeah, and like, so I think, like I said, it's very easy to get quite emotional about it all now and frustrated, and they should have done better. And like those ins for next year are good, but they had some massive ins this year as well. Like it's not necessarily. I just think another year of coaching, another year of Dan actually being able to pick guys that he wants that will suit his game. Will be massive for him. Massive.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer as well that Dan, when he took over the Brumbies, it took a year for them to actually find their feet under him, and he was a much, the Brumbies made a semi-final the year after, and Leicester, he was only there for 1 year, and I think there's a bit of a trend. It takes him a little while to work out what he wants, who he likes, and for some of the structures to be embedded, and maybe even his coaching style to be embraced. But I think we'll see that at the Waratahs. I have no doubt about that going forward. The Force, we're not surprised by that. I hinted that there was going to be some selections and some players that were left out. They were left out and they were dusted in that second half, particularly. Like depth shows, and when you're not able to bring on players who can handle the heat over there, and literally it's pretty hot over in Fiji, they wilted. And disappointing result, especially, given that they were still slim, remote chance of finals, being in the finals mix. That's certainly not the case, but a huge game between those two sides, the Force and the Waratahs this week. Brave man to bet on either side at the moment. I think the fact that the Force will play at home is a big thing for them. Some signing news: Carlo Tizzano's re-signed, is my understanding, a 2-year deal. That's a really big positive thing. I think Ben Donaldson won't be too far behind either. So that's some exclusive news that I've still actually got to write, by the way, on a Monday evening when we're recording this, but it'll come out on Tuesday.
Tweeting it now.
Some good, tweeting it there. So some good news for the Western Force, and hopefully people rock up for that last game. I know Simon Cron was pretty scathing. I think 55,000 kilometres they've had to travel throughout this Super Rugby campaign. The zigzag nature is something that you scratch your head out. It shouldn't occur. There should be more bucks. It should be more thought out. a Super Rugby draw, particularly for a side like the Force, who are so much further away from not just the Aussie sides, but the Kiwi sides as well. So important to address that one. Before we go, Ardie Savea announced as Super Rugby Player of the Year. Mentioned it off the top. He's such a good player. I love watching him. I know that everyone loves watching him. It's no great revelation. Unbelievable player anywhere he plays. And if you had 15 Ardie Saveas, you're winning a game, that's for sure. I can't understand if you're introducing a new Super Rugby Player of the Year award. I even said it to the Super Rugby commissioner at the start of the year before ball was kicked off. I said it last July. Let's have this award, and then that award was announced a few months later that it was going to occur, and then then it was announced that it was going to be announced. There was going to be up to date weekly rankings of how they're all going, and now they've come out and announced that Ardie Savea, 2 weeks out from the finals, is the Super Rugby Player of the Year. I said that, like what they do, I think, in other competitions, where it becomes a bit of a, silence. You don't find out, the awards and the recipients with, 3 to 4 to 5 weeks to go. Why would you not do that with rugby and then have some anticipation about who actually takes out this award? It's staggering that you'd announce it a couple of weeks out, I think.
Yeah, I'm puzzled as well. I was really excited about the joint venture for the Super Rugby Pacific because it allows, like you see it on TV, the marketing is quite similar, the graphics, all this kind of stuff. And when they were basically making that, a big thing was fantasy rugby, awards, being able to best player or even advertise certain things. So basically just having one collective effort where you can kind of push in the same direction, other than the old Sansa, you had 3 competing forces. And it was working, and then all of a sudden, it's like, did they not want it to gain attention? As you say, I've never heard of the Brownlow being done, 2 weeks before September or what. It just makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Surely you into the finals, last game, you have your little awards or whatever, but it just, I'm puzzled. I don't get it. It's not like the John Eales medal where you've got to go overseas and there's all this kind of competing forces. Like, we're in Super Rugby. It's Super Rugby next week. It's Super Rugby last week. We control the calendar. So hopefully it's just a small blip in the marketing efforts, because I think they've made big steps in the right direction this year, but this makes no sense.
Makes no sense. If you're going to do it, you do exactly what they do in the Brownlow or Dally, and you bring a night of nights. Like, this is people on either side of the ditch, and whoever's hosting the final, you maybe played on the Wednesday night, and you get the team over there, and it's a commitment from all 11 sides that are there that whoever's hosting it, you'll be there, or maybe it's, I don't know if you can do it the week after, given the international commitments. But get it sorted, because it's just half cocked, this, and it just looks amateur hour. Like, no one, a couple of tweets coming out there is not good enough. Like, the media weren't even given a heads up, like an embargo. This will come out on Monday night. It was just released. And you know what? As a journo, when you've worked the whole weekend, I know this was like a bit of a boo-hoo. We cover sport, like how good. But when it gets released on a Sunday when there's no heads up, I'm sorry, you've got other commitments in life. Anyway, it was a disappointing way to pay tribute to who is an unbelievable player who just conjured up one of the best wins in Super Rugby history, with Mowen Pacifica taking down the Blues, which was, if you haven't watched the game, go back, enjoy it. Sure. Friend of the pod, Patrick Pellegrini, wearing the number 10 jersey, great crossfield kick, a couple of other things in there. That's the sort of rugby that gets me excited, and an unbelievable game to watch. Okay, before we go, Wallaroos, a good win, a double header. There was more than 11,000 in Canberra for that game, which is a great result. I love the fact that there was more than 10,000 firstly there for it, but clearly it's off the back of let's go watch the Wallaroos play as well. So they were far too good in the end for the USA Eagles, and a controversial incident right at the end there with Georgina Friedrichs being stomped on. in their head by the Eagles centre. No place for that in the game, is there? Like, that was a disappointing result. Kind of, you look at the headlines, like a journo's naturally going to go to that. So in the last minutes, you copy update pretty quickly, but no place for that, is there?
No, there's not. I actually had the girls come into one of the cafes and served them the Yanks. Served them a few iced coffees. And I actually had someone come in today. One of our staff today was like, "Oh, I got a photo with Elena Mayer." Blah, blah. I was like, "It's really cool. Like, it's really cool that, and that's, you talk about marketing and poor job. Like, that's it, kind of doing it well on a different kind of scale." So. It's awesome having these games, having people watch it, get excited by it. And awesome that we got the win as well. So, sure, it's soured in terms of headlines and that, but positive experience, I think, for the Aussies.
We'll see how long Kelter's suspended for, and obviously a really class act for the US Sevens side as well. Won bronze against the Aussie women last year in Paris. So clearly a really good player, established midfielder there for the Eagles as well. But a 27-19 win for Australia. Still set piece issues. Line out didn't operate as well as they would have wanted. But 3 tries to Rogers, their front row. It kind of tells the story around the fact that Type 5 is still the area of concern for the Wallabies going forward. So a big one ahead up against Canada this week. It's going to be a double header with into the Queensland Reds game against the Hurricanes, which is a big one on Friday night. Sarah is going to be out for a little while with his MCL injury. Lukan Salakaia-Loto still out with his shoulder injury for a couple of weeks. Alex Hodgman no closer to coming back with a neck injury. And then on the weekend against the Brumbies in that defeat, the 24-14 defeat, Massimo Deluta's a dislocated wrist, which would hurt a lot. And we saw him come off midway through, though, or late in that second half. That's going to really test their front row stocks. So fingers crossed, they've got 3 fit ones there now. I'm sure they're looking at another one to come up because no George Blake there either, no Matt Gibbons. So they're really being tested up in the front row. Matt Fesler still to return. Harry Wilson's going to come back, I believe, at this point in time. A great result, the incumbent Wallabies captain. Josh Fluke not too far away, and I think Tom Liner will be back as well this week. So big game against the Canes. Been a big pod, Matty, and thank you for your time. Good pod. Good to have Ben Mowen on. As always, let us know what you think. It's been great and awesome to chat to the former Wallabies captain, Ben Mowen. And also a Lions tamer in Matt Timmer with the Brumbies. What a win there too. So
and more tries than a tight end prop.
and the great revelation of Peter Kimlin's
it was Kremlin-like. It was very directive and everything, but it was it was unreal. But yeah, good pod. Exciting times.
We better get Pete on the pod at some point in time. All right, until next time. Thanks very much.